You get a microphone closer.
Welcome to the Pensions Committee. All members are now required to attend in person. Members who wish to participate in non-decision-making capacity are able to do so remotely. This meeting will be live-streamed for public viewing. I would like to remind members who are physically present and also those who may be joining remotely of the following protocols. Only speak when invited to by the chair. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand and direct all communications via the chair. For those joining remotely, please ensure that your mics are muted when you are not speaking. If you're having any technical difficulties, please use the chat function to alert the meeting. Please do not use the chat function for putting formal questions to the committee or to make other comments. Any persistent disruptive behaviour will result in removal from the meeting. I would now like to hand over to the chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabia, and welcome everyone to the Pensions Committee meeting, and welcome to people who are joining us online as well. I am logged in, so I should be able to see your hands and things online, and some of our advisors are online as well, so let's see how we go. If we start, agenda item 1, apologies for absence, have we received?
Chair, we've received apologies from absence of councillors Desmond and Spence and Henry Coulters.
Okay, can I ask if there are any declarations of interest from members?
My wife is a Kpis member.
Okay, I think we previously noticed, tell me if I'm wrong here, we previously notified where people are members or have been members of the fund, and we have a list of those, and so we can, apart from those, go on, yeah? Thank you. Minutes of the meeting on the 16th of June, which have been circulated, I think, separately from the agenda pack, were they, or the ones? Okay. Can we, I won't go through them page by page, but can we agree them as a true record, or has anyone got any issues they wish to raise on them? Just wait for a second. Okay, can we agree those then? Okay, so agenda item 4, the petition from the Hackney Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. So as you'll all be aware, we've received a petition from the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, and this gained a lot of signatures internationally and nationally, and quite a few locally, but unfortunately not enough to reach the threshold where it would have been automatically taken as a sort of item at the council meeting as a petition. But we have taken the decision to invite a representative of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign to come and speak to us for 5 minutes and put their point of view. Following that, and we're going to ask, is Susan Azar, yeah?
No, it's me, Linda.
Sorry?
Linda Kelly.
Palestinian Solidarity. I can't see. Sorry, you'll be. I do. Forgive me. So you're behind. You're behind. Yeah. I was just the screen's in the way of me. Yeah. Just so what I'm going to do then after you, we've also agreed that the Hackney Friends of Israel will make a statement, and Linda Kelly will make that statement for 5 minutes. Now we are on sort of untried ground here, I think, and the protocol we've agreed is we'll just take the statements. I'm not intending to take questions from members or enter into debate about it, but we will respond to each of you in writing on the contents of your presentation. So, if I can ask Susan Azar, if you want to make you've sent us a written representation already, which we have circulated. Welcome to the committee, and if you'd like to make your statement, for which you have 5 minutes.
Shall I say from Okay, is this working? Good. Hello, yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Suzanne Rasuli. I am a Hackney resident, and I'm the co-secretary of Hackney Palestine Solidarity Campaign. As the chairman of the Pension Committee mentioned, we have a very strong petition. When we submitted it to you in June, it had 58,000 signatures. It now has 75,000 signatures, many hundreds of which. In June, there were more than 500 signatures from Hackney residents. By now, probably more. We haven't analyze the numbers in terms of the addresses. But many hundreds of those signatories are Hackney residents. The reason for this petition is that early last year, PSC, Pakistan Solidarity Campaign, they published a research into local authority pension fund investments. When this publication came out, we as Hackney PSC received a number of very emotional, angry messages from the public and from other activists in the borough saying, what are you doing about this? Because Hackney has some very, very questionable investments in their pension fund. They, for example, have investments in Elbit, Caterpillar, Cemex, Raytheon, Bezek, and they have Anwar, and they also have investments in a number of Israeli banks. These Israeli banks are on the UN database of complicit companies. I will explain why these companies are questionable or complicit. The reason these companies are, many of them, not all of them, are on the UN database, but there are others which aren't, but should be, like Elbit or Caterpillar. These companies are active in Israeli illegal settlements in the West Bank. Their involvement includes, for example, producing means of oppression. You know, Elbit is a military industry and it produces the bombs that kill civilians or destroy civilian homes. They also, some of the companies are providing services and goods and loans to these illegal settlements. Others are involved in demolishing Palestinian homes and infrastructure and or building, making way for illegal settlements and therefore providing means of building illegal settlements. Israeli settlements in the West Bank are illegal under international law. There are numerous UN resolutions to attest their illegality. This is because they were built on land taken forcibly from 1948 during successive wars or skirmishes or basically settlement building. They've been taken from Palestinians and they are built illegally. International law does not recognize them. Therefore, any company profiting from them or operating in them are also in breach of international law. UK government guidance on overseas business risk very clearly highlights the fact that any activity in these illegal settlements have legal and economic risks, and companies continuing businesses with or benefiting from these settlements are not encouraged are not supported by UK government. Hackney is therefore risking its pension fund reputationally, legally, and financially. We understand, we've had a long correspondence with the chairman. We understand that it's not so simple for Hackney to just decide to divest from certain companies. All we're asking is that Hackney has a good look at their procedures, especially their ESG, environmental, social, and governance procedures, to ensure that companies that are in breach of international law or on breach of human rights, they're not featuring in our pension fund portfolio. We are also asking that Hackney works towards, make a commitment towards reducing the exposure of this pension fund.
You've 1 minute.
Okay, I'm actually done. That's all. We understand that you're not in a position to divest straight away. We are asking for you to have a good look and implement good screening and vetting procedures so that these investments do not appear in the pension fund. And those that are existing, that you can, over several years, you can start reducing your exposure to them. That's all.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your statement. Can I welcome Linda and Kelly? So I should say welcome back, the next member of the council. You're very welcome to make your statement, and you have 5 minutes to do that. So
okay.
Thank you very much, Linda.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Chair, the committee, and Rabia and Andrew for allowing us to speak. It is really appreciated. I'm not going to read out our submission because you've already got it down in front of you. What I can say, what I've just heard, is unbelievable, and it goes against everything that is true. It's a fabrication, and we refute it completely, because there's always two sides of the story, and you have to understand both sides of the story to make a judgment. Now, what this paper they've set out, as far as we're concerned, is born out of pure anti-Semitism and malice, because anti-Israel now is the new anti-Semitism. Whether you believe it or not, this country, thank God, has made enough laws to protect the Jewish community. So you can't say I'm anti-Semitic, you can't say I'm anti-Semitic, but you can say I'm anti-Israel and get away with it. So the petition was brought, and one of the things I'd like to point out, that this petition was not brought here for the benefit of Hackney employees. Members know that you administrate the fund for your employees. I am one of your employees. I benefit from the fund. Your role is to ensure that it's managed in accordance with regulations 2013 and 2016, e.g. monitoring, reviewing and management of this fund. You have a duty of care together with the LGPS to ensure that the funds provide a secure investment for your council employees, yourselves and me included. I cannot understand why the credence is given to this petition, which is claimed to now have 78,000 signatures, but they're not Hackney residents. It worked out, when I last heard, it was 518 signatures, which fell short of the 750 signatures that you needed for a petition. But I mean, equality, hearing two sides of the story, I can understand it, and you're hearing my side of the story. Hackney PSC seems to be empowered by the fact that there was a court case in 2020 that ruled that that was brought by Miss Lewis and the Hackney PSC. So it gave them a little bit of backbone to bring this petition forward at this particular time. They are not concerned with Hackney employees and their secure future. They are only concerned and motivated by their hatred for a Jewish state. Employees, as you say, if you go forward with this petition, if you accept what they are putting forward in front of you, you are asking the LGPS to go against their fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of their employees' future, which could lead to legal ramifications. Maybe not from the Secretary of State, but definitely from any employees that don't back what the PSC are asking you to do. On their website, it says that the LGPS invests in 55 companies that have connections with Israel. This investment tops up to £3.5 billion. So if you took that investment away, who have they put forward to fill that gap? And if you find people to fill that gap, what losses are you going to make in the meantime? That is not fulfilling your fiduciary.
Got a minute left.
Yeah. So what I can say is, if you allow this to go forward, you are demonizing the only democratic state in that region that has elections, that actually had about half a dozen elections to kick out Benjamin Netanyahu because he was not doing what the country wanted him to do. I understood that the Labour Party was no longer tolerating anti-Semitism. And you have 20,000 Jewish families living in Hackney, contributing to the vibrancy and the culture of Hackney, compared to 518 signatures. That's 518 signatures. Please, I'm asking you to take back your moral compass and do not take this seriously. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. As I said earlier, we are not having a debate about this today, and there are no items on this agenda today that actually reflect deal with this issue really. But thank you both for your contributions, and we will respond in writing formally to both of you. So thank you very much. Okay, so if we can then move on then to item 5. Cash flow planning. I don't know who's going to introduce this. We've got Michael Hunter in the room, and Andrew I saw online. So how's it going to work?
Yep. So I'll do a very quick introduction, and we'll go through the more detailed paper. Basically, we've spoken about cash flow issues at various committees over the years. I'm pleased to say that the fund has a long time been cash flow positive, and it certainly looks as if it's going to be for the next couple of years at least. But there are signs that that there are pressures to turn that around. And this paper looks at some scenarios around that. And Andrew Johnson from Hymans is going to go through the detail of it. I'll hand over to Andrew.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, Chair. I'm very happy to share my paper on screen if you would wish me to do so. Otherwise, well, if you can let me know if you'd like me to share it on screen, or otherwise I'll just keep cracking on and talking to the paper.
Yeah, if you do it on the screen, please. Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
I think most of us have the paper, but you know, belt and braces.
How are we doing?
It's coming up on the line, but I don't see you. Oh,
Yeah, it's just come up.
okay. Yes, that's showing.
Okay, perfect. So as Michael said, cash flow planning is a very important area, primarily to ensure that there are arrangements in place to pay the benefits that are due. And the aim of cash flow planning is to make sure that you avoid being a forced seller of assets, should the plan become cash flow negative. If you do that, if you have to sell assets, you could either be selling assets on a less than opportune moment, and in addition to that, you would be eroding the assets to pay the benefits. So kind of two aspects and two motivations to make sure that cash flow planning remains on the annual agenda for the fund, and that we keep an eye on what those long-term projections are. And there are two lenses within which we look at cash flow planning within this paper. The first of those is a very long-term view, where we look at the projections over 20 years from the valuation date, which takes us out to 2039, and we look at the different scenarios within that. And the second of those is to focus much more on the near-term cash flow planning and requirements, recognizing some of the sort of nature of some of the investment mandates that the fund holds. So taking the first of those, the long-term cash flow planning first. So what we have done in this chart is look at cash flow projections based on cash out, representing current actives, deferreds, pensioners, and the liabilities, and cash in, focusing purely on the contributions from employees and employers. We do not, at this stage, include any consideration of the investment component. We purely focus on the liabilities and the contributions that we're expecting to see based on the valuation, and based on the contributions in this instance which have been agreed as part of the last valuation. And what we can see is that the purple line represents the net cash flow position, and we can see that the purple line stays above the zero horizon, or the y-axis, or the x-axis, sorry, and the zero line for a few years, and after that it falls below the line, and the fund is expected to become cash flow negative. Not to a massive degree, but gradually increasing over time, over this 20-year time period through to 2039, and at the end of that it gets to about 15 million. So positive for 2 or 3 years, marginally negative for the near term thereafter, and growing incrementally over the remainder of the sort of 20 years from the valuation date to minus 15 million. My conclusions from that would be no action to recommend at this stage, but there would be consideration, taking that view in isolation, to consider whether or not there is extra income going to be required to meet that negative cash flow situation. The good news for the pension fund is that over the last few investment strategy reviews, we have focused on potential future income requirements from the investment portfolios to help plug that shortfall. And there are, you'll recall, since the 2016 valuation, we have been investing in income-focused mandates in private debt with Churchill, with Primera, and more recently with LSIV and their private debt mandate, and LSIV and the infrastructure mandate. And those investments will, once fully deployed and once fully invested, will generate cash flows, which will help reduce and eliminate this cash shortfall and help within the cash flow planning for the fund. We also looked at a second scenario, which was, well, what happens if the contributions that are currently being paid to the fund are varied, but potentially as a scenario that potentially is something that might be discussed in future valuations, as has been the case of recent valuations. And I know this is something that Laura will come back to in a moment whenever it comes to thinking about the sort of funding position and the considerations around de-risking. And in this scenario, where contributions are reduced by 1% per annum for 6 years from 2022-23, what we can see, and then they remain stable thereafter, what we can see is that cash shortfall over this time period to 2039 would potentially increase by a further 20 million to minus 35 million in the year of 2039. So unsurprisingly, reducing contributions makes the cash flow negative position more exacerbated or exaggerated, if you like, and therefore even more important. So contributions really important when it comes to just overall cash flow planning, to make sure you don't have to sell assets to pay pensions. So that's sort of the high level picture of the long-term view. We're okay for a couple of years. We definitely still need to think about income generating assets when it comes to investment strategies, and continue to do that as we have been for the past few strategy reviews. But the focus of the remainder of this paper therefore turns to the near-term cash flow planning and what steps we need to take in terms of planning for drawdowns and so on and so forth. Now, Michael also mentioned that the recent cash flow experience of the fund has been positive, and that's just summarised in this table. Essentially, over the financial years of 2019-20 and 2020-21, the net cash surplus has been around £10 million, 11 million pounds. So that just confirms that over the past 2 years, what we expected is what has happened. So just a small affirmation of that point to sort of give comfort. As I say, the remainder of the paper focuses on the near-term cash flow planning and how we can think about making sure we've got enough cash to fund primarily the drawdowns that are required for the private debt and infrastructure mandates. This table summarises the commitments that have been made and the monies which have been drawn to date. And what we can see is that there are, roughly speaking, around £400 million worth of commitments which have been made to illiquid asset classes. The expectation is that when we invested, was that it would take sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 years to draw down that money. Some of them are very new. ELSA Private Equity and Renewables only just a few months ago. Churchill and Primera have a couple of years history. But what we can see is that when we look at the funds drawn to date, that there's still around 400 million committed, around 150 million paid out, and therefore, broadly speaking, in round numbers, around 250 million still to be paid to these mandates prior to them being fully invested and fully committed, if you like. And we expect that to take around 1 to 2 years for that money to be fully deployed. So therefore, the focus therefore is much more around let's say the quarterly cash flow planning, engaging with the investment managers to understand what the pace of that drawdown is going to be, and to make a plan that we've got sufficient liquid assets, primarily being held in the fund's case within the BlackRock short-dated cash fund, to fund those payments when they come due, and not have to, let's say we got a 30 million cash draw and the markets have fallen by 40%. The aim is not to have to sell an asset which has been is at distressed values where you might crystallise a loss that has been incurred. The aim is to have a plan in place so that you can use cash in the short-term bond fund to fund those drawdowns. And what this table does, if we focus on the bottom row, so basically it's based on projections provided by the fund's illiquid managers, so Churchill, Primera, LSIV Renewable Infrastructure and LSIV Private Debt, how much are they going to need to invest over the coming quarters, their projections. And essentially what this does is it looks at the net cash flow position, taking into account all of those projected capital calls and distributions that we're anticipating. And the net cash flow position on a quarterly basis is red, so it's negative. And the highest it gets to is around sort of 35 million, albeit there are some spikes within that. 33 million, I should say. So the plan that is currently in place for the fund is to hold £50 million in cash to facilitate any near-term drawdown requirements. And essentially what the information in this table does is it confirms to me that that plan remains appropriate, that we should continue to monitor the near-term requirements of these mandates closely over the drawdown period, i.e. the next sort of 1 to 2 years. And so what we've suggested is to continue to maintain £50 million in the BlackRock short-dated bond fund, and that we monitor this on a 6-monthly basis. And we'll do that with the officers. And if there's any change to the plan which is required, then we would report back to the committee and let you know if there are any necessary changes to take place. So essentially, the plan that's in place at the minute remains appropriate, and we recommend continuing with that sort of circa 50 million cash float in the short-dated bond fund, but also to monitor this behind the scenes and let you know if anything changes.
Okay, thank you very much. Just before I take a question, just one immediate point of clarification. You mentioned 50 million twice. Are you holding 50 million in cash in addition to the 50 million in the short bond fund, or is that the same 50 million?
It's the same 50 million.
When you're in cash, it's actually in the ultra short bond fund.
Yes. So rather than holding in cash, we are putting in a fund, which means it's secure. It's earning a very modest income, but it's because interest rates are so low. But that's the most secure place for it to be, rather than, let's say, being in a bank account, for example.
Yeah, even a modest interest rate on 50 million is worth thinking about, isn't it? Okay, Jonathan, I see, is the only hand I can see at the moment, and then Nick. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew, thank you very much. You do in this paper point out that these projections do not include investment-related income. Now, I know that in the markets just recently, there's been a real crash in terms of the dividend income provided by UK equities in particular. Is that significant in terms of your short-term projections, and is it going to improve, would you say?
So typically, if you think about the investment portfolio that the fund has, we've got largely three components: growth, income, and protection. Equity fall into the growth aspect. So yes, you do get dividend income from your equities, but you're primarily investing in them for the growth expectations that they're expected to be driven by in terms of increasing their value. So at this moment, the fund does not use the dividend income from equities to facilitate any cash flow requirements, and we wouldn't recommend any change to that, because essentially the dividends can be used by the managers to reallocate within the fund and sort of tactically position within the fund. So that's something that we could consider in the future if the fund was in a very negative cash flow position. But at this stage, we wouldn't recommend using any of the dividend income from the equities within the cash flow planning of the fund. One of the primary objectives and principal objectives of the private debt and renewables infrastructure mandates is to generate income, and that's the focus of their mandates. And therefore, as that income comes back, that can be used for cash flow payments. So the dividend income, Jonathan, I think we would say the dividends have been reasonably stable at around 2 or 3% for equities for quite some time, and we could consider that might be more favourable in the long term, or in the near term, I should say, based on the economic outlook. But we would not recommend using that in any way, shape, or form for the cash flow management within the fund.
Okay, apart from anything, we're exploiting the law of compound interest there, aren't we?
Yes, by reinvesting, that's correct.
Yeah. Nick, then Ben, after Nick, Ben, online. Nick.
Just a point of one of the assumptions, which is
around inflation. I'm just interested, if inflation does take off in a serious way, how would that influence your model, Andrew? The other thing is, I mean, this is just to understand the way you've set it out. I don't really follow the link between the on page on the contributions versus the transfers out. We got contributions of around 78. I was trying to match that up to the diagram, and I was defeated. Maybe could you just explain the scenario 1 and scenario 2, just what it means? I can't work out precisely what this graph is telling me, other than that over the longer term, as I understand it, the existing pensioners obviously decline, and meanwhile we take on more obligations at the top, and that's what fundamentally leads to this deficit. But just if you could clarify that and just help me match your model on that. But my key point is around the inflation assumption.
So I might bring Laura in for some of that. So within the valuation and the valuation of liabilities, there will be an inflation assumption. That doesn't factor in. Or in fact, Laura, I might let you comment on how the inflation factors into the contributions side of things. But on the liability side of things, there is an inflation assumption which is built in, which is discussed and debated at each valuation standpoint.
Yeah, so the inflation assumption will...
So welcome, Laura. For those new members here, you're our actuary, aren't you?
I am, yes. Thank you for the welcome. So the inflation assumption, there is an inflation assumption underlying these projections, but it is included in both the contribution side to an extent and also on the benefit outflow side. So the contributions that you see in the chart will be based on a projection of payroll over time, and to the extent that we assume salary increases are linked to payroll, linked to inflation, it will include future inflation in that. And similarly, because the benefits outgoes are linked to inflation, there will be an allowance for future inflation in that as well. So whilst we haven't considered here how inflation will change in the future, it will be, it's brought into the contributions and the benefit outflow simultaneously.
I would expect that. I guess the question is whether inflation assumptions have different implications on the contribution and the income side. So if you simply assume that they match, then obviously the model works. But if there's any divergence between the effects, there's some structural change, then they may not. So, and that was the question I was driving at.
Yeah, I think is that how sensitive is your model to increases in inflation, which look possible, don't they, at the moment, for honest?
Yeah, so there would be no divergence in terms of what we would assume for future salary increases. Having said that, we are about to undergo another triennial valuation of the fund, so we will be reviewing the assumptions that we make about future inflation and indeed future salary growth. But I don't think it would invalidate anything that you see in this paper, if that's the question.
Okay. Do you want to deal with the second part of Nick's question before I bring in Ben?
Just to explain the link between the table and the diagram.
Andrew, is that back to you?
Yeah, and that might be back to Laura, but I guess this is essentially in bar 1 of the diagram we've got.
Could you put the table up again? Are you able to do that?
Yeah, I can do that.
We've all got it somewhere if it's not a problem. I can find it, but
okay.
Thank you.
This is possibly one for me to answer as well.
Okay.
So the table is based on, that's past 2 years of data. So that is actual data from the past 2 years from the annual report and accounts, whereas what you see in the charts is based on a projection from the membership data that was supplied for the 2019 actuarial valuation. So that is why you might see.
Yeah, absolutely. I do understand that, but I just really wanted to be clear. I was trying to match that 78, 76 onto the table, because as you say, that looks forward. But I just want to see where the 78 appears on the diagram.
Yeah, so if you have a look at the red line where it says total contributions, it would be, the starting figure here is 2021, so it looks to be around 70 there. But yeah, it's just that the source of the data will be the membership data for the valuation. So we wouldn't expect that to tie up exactly with annual reports and accounts from the last 2 years.
But what it will show is that so the information included in the chart is like for like based on the date that it was generated, which was the valuation date. Now some of the driving forces behind those numbers might have varied between the point whenever this was created, which was 2019, and now. But what you can take confidence from is that the asset or the contributions and liability numbers are based on the same driving forces. And then whenever we take a look at the later table, that's actual experience over the past 2 years. So chart information is like for like, i.e. is a good projection of being cash flow positive for a few years. And the actual experience based on the accounts is higher, primarily because of movements. I would say movements in interest rates and so on and so forth that have taken place subsequent to this data being cut. So hopefully that gives you reassurance that it's like for like in the table that is presented, and it's representing real experience within the numerical accounting information.
Right, just so I'm clear, 'cause I read that diagram as being starting at 65, 68, something like that. And the previous one is, the 2021 was 76. So does that imply that it goes down, or that that's just a very approximate bar?
To me, that would imply. Sorry, I'm just having a look. Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
So it's between 60 and 80. No.
The red line.
It's nearer 60, and this supplier suggests it would be around. I mean, assuming we haven't had a major change from 1920, we had a £2 million change. You might, I don't know, it could go down to 74. That's, I mean, if it is the same, that's fine. I just want to make sure that I'm looking at the same thing when I'm looking at that bar. That's all.
Sorry, Chair, do you want me to try and?
Yeah, good.
I think I understand what Andrew's saying.
Okay.
So this chart here
Right.
was produced a couple of years ago.
Ah, right, okay.
The table is reality now.
Got it, okay.
Is that right, Andrew?
Yes, that's correct.
That's right, yeah.
That resolves the issue for me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So you've got estimates and actuals basically, haven't you? Okay, Ben.
Thanks. I think I've got the tables at scenario 1 and 2. Can I just be clear? But essentially, I'm a bit colourblind, so forgive me if I get this wrong. But what looks like the purple line at the bottom, if we take scenario 1, that is essentially the inverse of the gap between the red line and the dotted line at the top.
That's correct.
Showing the difference. Fine. Okay. And the red line is essentially what's coming in. The dotted line is what's going out in crude terms. Fine. Fine. I'm with it. Then I suppose my questions with this, and then moving on to the following page, table 2, estimated cash flow. I mean, I suppose then in my observation would be, in many senses, it actually just underlies what a strong position we're currently in, because if you look at the contributions and the outgoings, we've still, in the next 5 quarters, got more contributions coming in than we've got outgoings, and that's without any of all of our investments. So that's just a month by month basis, without the say £1 billion we've otherwise got invested or saved. That's a very strong position to be in, if I've understood that correctly. But then I suppose my more specific question would just be to dive into the Primera situation. If they've still got 48 million to draw down, and we're 2 years in, 2 years to go, their drawdown in the next 5 quarters is only about 7 or 8 million. So what are we expecting, a massive drawdown of 40 million in the final year, or are they just not going to draw it all down? What's the story?
So Primera have been slow in drawing down capital within their mandate. I think that's fair to say. That's something we touched on when we did the private debt review a few quarters ago. The expectation is that they may not fully draw down over the course of their investment, but I guess at this stage they're expecting around 20 million more to be drawn in the next year and a half, and then we'll get a revised forecast from them on that. So I think the pace of the Primera drawdown has been well behind what was projected whenever their mandate came into existence. The Churchill mandate is much more along the lines of what you would expect for a mandate which is circa 2 years into its life, at being relatively close to being drawn. There are two reasons. I think there are two sort of driving forces behind the Primera one, and why I would say they will not reach anywhere near the 95 million. And one is because they have been slow to deploy capital, partly because of their investment approach. Because they've been slow to deploy capital, some of the capital they did deploy at the start is now generating income, and therefore they can offset that income to deploy into new investments as they identify it. And therefore, I don't expect them to go anywhere near drawing the full capital amount that you see on the page here. But I think they would be the first to admit that they have been much slower to deploy capital than they expected at the start of the mandate.
But does that have an adverse situation on our projections on that investment? Because if they're not drawing it down, or not, or is that money otherwise just in equities achieving a good investment anyway, and so it doesn't really make any difference to us?
So the money, I would say that the approach that the fund has taken to cash flow management is very much a pragmatic one. So, for example, in the initial drawdown phase of Primera and Churchill, when we committed 160 million, we essentially took the 160 million that was in equities and put around 60 million in cash and kept 100 million in equities. And as we've identified in this paper, we've still got another circa 250 million to go into private illiquid mandates. And broadly speaking, we're saying keep 50 million of dry powder, top that up if it gets drawn down, but keep the rest of it in the markets. So essentially what you're doing is taking a bit of a balanced view of not having too many eggs in your equity basket and relying on what the sensitivity to the point whenever that gets disinvested, but actually having enough. So it's like a moderately de-risked portfolio by holding some assets in the short bond fund.
Thank you.
Okay. I just have one question. Sorry, Cam.
Yes, my question is on employer contributions. Are they coming in regularly on time at the moment, or are they being delayed? Andrew?
On the distributions, is that Cam? Sorry.
Yes. Just saying that.
Andrew, go on.
Did you get my question?
So I think if I picked up, sorry, the mic was a bit funny there, Cam. If I'm correct in picking up your question, it was, are the distributions coming through on time at this stage, or?
Yeah.
So in the early stages of these mandates, they will typically offset income that they have received with capital calls that they are going to require. So, for example, if they achieve £5 million of income and they're going to draw down need to draw down £10 million for new investments, they will only draw £5 million, i.e., 10 million minus 5. That tends to have a period of up to a couple of years where they're allowed to do that. So they would still be in that phase. Hence the fact that there's not much income coming back from the mandates at this stage. However, when we get into the more mature stage of these investments, and for Churchill and Primera, we're very much getting into that phase. You can see, for example, that the Churchill projection is to be income generating and distributing very soon. And therefore, I would say whenever we get to 1 to 2 years down the track for the LSIV renewables infrastructure and the LSIV private debt fund, that's when we'll really see the benefits. And whenever we look at the cash flow projections for the overall fund of being cash flow negative in 2 to 3 years, the income that comes off these mandates will help plug that gap. So I think at this stage, Cam, very much on track, but they are still in the very early stages, and therefore they're still net cash flow taking money out of the other investments at this stage.
Okay. So if I got one question, which is we're talking about continue to maintain 50 million holding in the BlackRock short bond fund. Your paper later on says at the end of quarter one we had 90 million in there. in that investment. Is that so?
So
So what does that mean? Is we're going to? I know it's short term and the money comes in and out, but does that mean we're going to hold it at 90 million or reduce it? We expect it to reduce from 90 million to 50 million.
So at this stage, it has reduced to 50 million. In fact, there was a small top up which was made during the course of the third quarter. The reason why it would have been up closer to 90 million, Chair, it would have been in the very whenever we were committing to the LSIV renewable and private debt funds, they notified us that there were going to be some pretty big drawdowns in the early stages. So we kind of exaggerated the cash position just to be ready for that. Going forward, I would expect it to be at or around 50 million, and I would probably, because there is the fund's bank account as well as the short-dated cash fund, and we liaise with Michael and Morgan to make sure that we're not. We take into account both aspects whenever we're coming to the cash flow planning piece. I would expect it to be much closer to 50 million, and I wouldn't expect it to go as high as 90 million again, unless there was new information from the managers.
Okay. The only other point I had to make was about monitoring, and I think at some point in the future we need to talk a bit more about monitoring. We've had this conversation in relation to the budget, haven't we? And budget setter and budget monitoring, which becomes more important now as we get to watch the cash closer for a number of reasons, some of which are evidenced in reports later on. Okay, then, can I, if there are no other points, can I ask members to note the report and as in 2.1 and to agree the to agree to continue to maintain the 50 million holding in BlackRock Ultra Short Bond. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. So if we can move on to item 6, the funding and investment de-risking considerations. So who's going to do this one?
So I'll do a quick intro.
Michael.
So the report presents this a joint paper from both Andrew and Laura, so the investment consultant and the actuary, in respect of funding and investment considerations. I think we've spoken over various committees in the past about de-risking our portfolio, etc. And this looks at some of the issues connected to that alongside the actual impact on funding level. And what the current improved funding level actually means in terms of the fund's ability to meet its benefit payments. So it's a joint paper by Andrew and Laura, but I think Laura's going to take the lead in taking us through it at this point.
Okay, before I ask you to introduce your paper, can I just point out, in the recommendations, we've got a key recommendation here, which is to agree to bring forward the council contribution rate review to the end of this year, which obviously is a very important issue. Okay, so Heinens.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Michael. This is actually the first pensions committee that I have attended virtually, so I apologise that I'm not as au fait with the IT side of things. Can I just check that everyone can see that I'm sharing the paper on my screen?
I think we can see it, but probably had trouble reading it online. But I think everyone should have the report in front of them as well. If it's a problem for anyone, could they shout? I don't see anyone. Okay, so we all got it, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So the background to this, as Michael's been explaining, is that the fund has experienced strong asset performance since the 2019 actuarial valuation, and that served to improve the past service funding position. Indeed, if we were to report that today, we would be reporting a funding level that's just over 100%. And when that happens, a question that we are quite often asked is, what do we do now when the fund is over 100% funded? As you'll be aware, the LGPS is an open scheme, open to both future benefit accrual and new joiners to the scheme. So being over 100% funded today isn't actually that significant. It isn't a case of, job done, we can pat ourselves in the back and go home. However, when the fund is in a good position, it is a good time to stop and consider if there's anything that we can do to either reduce reliance on future employer contributions or reduce future funding level volatility by looking more in depth at investment strategy or possibly a combination of the two. So the question is, can we do either or both of these things and still meet the fund's long-term funding objective to be able to pay the benefits? I don't have an answer to that today. In this paper, what we've considered is what the funding level actually does look like today, or 30th of June actually, is when we prepared these figures as of. But the position would be broadly similar to that today. And then what does this improved funding position mean in terms of next steps? We have actually set out some important background just in the first couple of pages here. Andrew, you'll recall, carried out a full investment strategy review in 2020, and within that he did consider possible de-risking. You can see the strategy in green here that was agreed upon by this committee following that investment strategy review, and that is the strategy that is the implementation of which is currently underway. As part of that exercise, Andrew did actually consider some what-if analysis, including what if the fund had more assets, which it does now have today. And the conclusions really from that what-if exercise were that if the fund had 10% more assets, then there might be some scope to reduce risk within the investment strategy. But that was perhaps unlikely to be there would be scope to do that, as well as reducing the employer contribution rate, at least not to the extent considered in Andrew's paper. And really that is a crucial consideration. It is the combination of the contributions and investment strategy that work together to meet the future benefit cost. So it is important to consider them together, and really we're trying to find a balance between the two that the fund is happy with. On page 3, we've set out the past service funding position and what that looked like as at the 30th of June. That's shown in chart 1. But before I go on to explain that chart, it's just worth highlighting that the funding level is quite a simplistic measure. It does only focus on the past service benefits that have been accrued, but it is also only based on a single set of actuarial assumptions, and in particular, it's quite sensitive to the assumption that you make about future investment returns. So that's why we've chosen to show it in a chart here. And you may recall we showed the funding level in a similar chart in the 2019 actuarial valuation report. And this really just highlights that the funding level is sensitive to the choice of assumption about future investment return. So what we've shown is, funding level on the y-axis and future assumed investment return, sometimes called discount rate, on the x-axis, and then you can see what the funding level was at 31st March 2019 in blue, based on various different future investment return assumptions. And what we've actually shown is based on our modelling, what we think the likelihood is that the investment strategy could return a given discount rate, a given future investment return. So the 2019 valuation position is shown in blue, and then the more updated position as at 30th of June there is shown in green. So if I just pick off, for example, based on the 2019 valuation, there was a 72% likelihood that the fund would return the valuation discount rate of 3.85%, and on that basis we reported in the valuation report a funding level of 92%. If we were to set the same criteria now and say, well, we want to set that assumption based on there being a 72% likelihood of that being achieved by the fund's investment strategy, then we would report a past service funding position of 107% as at the 30th of June. But as I say, that is just, that's just me picking off one point in the chart. So really what I'm trying to say here is that the key takeaways is that no matter what assumption you make, the fund is in a better position today. That is, it has more pounds of assets per £1 of benefit to be made in the future. So it is in a better place compared to 2019. However, this is only considering the past service funding position, so it is not the be-all and end-all when it comes to pensions funding. And that's probably more brought to life in chart 2 on page 4. So the funding level itself only considers the past service benefits, the benefits that have been accrued up to the valuation date. In chart 2, we can see, or what this chart illustrates is why that's not the only important thing here. More of the benefits that we paid out to the fund's members over the next 50 years are actually the benefits that will be accrued by new joiners and existing members' new accrual. So yes, the improvement in funding level is good news. Certainly, it is not, the end game. So based on that measure of the fund alone, Andrew and I wouldn't be recommending any drastic changes in contribution strategy or investment strategy. So what are Andrew and I actually recommending? What can we take from this? Well, really, what we are recommending is that we do fully explore, what can be done in terms of contribution strategy and investment strategy, and we would propose to carry out what we call an asset liability monitoring exercise, which is the type of exercise that Andrew used in his investment strategy review, and indeed how we set the council's contribution rate as part of the 2019 valuation. In such an exercise, we're not just looking at the past service benefits, we're looking at those that have been accrued already and those that will continue to be accrued in future. We're considering long-term objectives, and we don't just look at a single set of assumptions. We consider a whole host of possible future economic scenarios, 5,000 to be exact. So importantly, by carrying out that exercise, we can look at the contribution and investment strategy in tandem, and make sure that we're getting the right balance, or the fund is getting the right balance that you're comfortable with, in the two, when it comes to considering whether you would reduce future contributions or de-risk investment strategy, or any of the other possible options that you might choose in light of a stronger funding position. For the avoidance of doubt, this is an exercise that we would carry out anyway as part of the 2019 actuarial valuation. So really the recommendation is just to bring that exercise forward and carry that out ahead of the valuation, and to do that jointly between Andrew and myself, so that we can consider the contribution and investment strategies together. So that's the recommendation from us. I'm happy to take any questions on the paper.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions on the paper? Comments? Can I ask Nick's question on the last paper about the impact of inflation on this on this scenario? I know I don't want to go too far ahead into talking about a review that we've just agreed to do in a few months' time, but that does leap out as an obvious question on this. Is there anything? Yeah.
Can I just say, I was going to ask the same question.
Oh, right, sorry.
Again, no, I'm not. Just to add to it, though, well, to make it more specific, I mean, it seems to me we are moving out of equities and into more sort of bond type investments, in which inflation does have a differential effect, and therefore the assumptions are important in this area. And I think that adds, Chair, to the recommendation that we should, in this situation of increasing uncertainty over this future, bring the thing forward. So I think that consideration lends force to the recommendation in the paper.
I think I would agree. But so, sorry, Simon's got any comments on the inflation question and the other points?
One comment I have actually just around the inflation assumption. One of the things so I think we had recommended carrying out the contribution rate review in winter of this year. I have also discussed with fund officers carrying out a review of the actuarial assumptions for the valuation purposes to be completed before we carry out that exercise, and that would be brought to this committee as well.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Yes, this might be a digression. I just want to know, or if you can tell us, what are the criteria that you take into consideration in determining the secondary contribution rate? Because I believe we are not uniform, is that right?
Sorry, can I ask just to repeat the question? I'm getting some noise from the room.
I said that, what are the criteria that should take into consideration in determining the secondary rate? Because I believe they are not uniform, is that right?
The secondary contribution rate.
Yes.
So when we carry out the asset liability modelling exercise that I've described, we are actually more interested, as you will have seen from Andrew's previous paper, we're more interested in total contributions in, and that is really what we focus on. We're focusing on total contributions in, total asset returns in. It's in this type of exercise that we allow for that piece that Andrew was saying he hadn't, the investment income isn't allowed for. It is allowed for in the asset modelling exercise. So we're interested in the total contribution in, the total investment return income in, and the total benefit outflow out. It really is just a function of how the regulations are drafted, frankly, as to why we actually have to split the contribution that is certified into a primary contribution rate and a secondary contribution rate. So really, when we are carrying out that review, we would be recommending a total contribution rate for the council, and the modelling would be recommending, or not, wouldn't be recommending, would be providing you with the evidence that you need to select the total contribution rate. How we then divvy that up later between primary and secondary contributions really is it's of secondary order.
Okay, Ben.
Thanks, Chair. Just to understand the relevance of Chart 2, if I've got it right, the point is that because going forward 50 years, the majority of the money that we're expecting to come in and in a way go out, we haven't actually got yet because it comes from new joiners. It thus adds a degree of caution to getting too carried away with us being over the 100%, because essentially we're banking on money we haven't yet got in yet. Is that the sort of the summary of the point? If I've
that is 100% correct. Yes.
Right.
It's both about. It will always be the case, which is why when we are setting when Andrew's helping you set your investment strategy, and when I'm recommending a contribution rate for the fund's employers, primarily the council, that is why we actually don't focus on that funding level measure at all. We have to report it for regulatory reasons, but we don't focus on that at all. It's not an input to our modelling. When we do our modelling, what we're inputting is the kind of things that you saw in the charts in Andrew's paper. It's what is the projected future contribution income, investment income, albeit that was missing from Andrew's chart, and future benefit outgo. And in that, we do allow for everything that we might expect to happen in the future. So new joiners earning benefits and paying contributions. It's precisely that. Fine. That's why we tend not to focus too much on funding level.
And I understand the purpose of this paper, the twin track of it. One, is there any scope to reduce the council's contributions, and how sensible is that? And the other thing described as de-risking, as I understand that in simple terms, that would be, say, moving away from a more risky equity base to possibly a safer, lower return somewhere else. Is that broadly right?
That's correct. So essentially moving more from your growth assets into your protection assets primarily.
What's a protection asset? How would you define that?
So protection assets are essentially corporate bonds, fixed income gilts, index-linked gilts. That's what we would categorise as protection assets. The reason why they are deemed, corporate bonds would have some elements of that. The reason why they're deemed protection assets is because the movement in their value is similar to the movement in the liability value. So, i.e., there's a degree of inflation that's considered whenever it comes to assuming the liability valuation, and there's a degree of interest rate sensitivity which is considered when valuing the liabilities. So protection in the sense that they move in the same way as the liabilities move.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And obviously this chart reflects the long-term nature of the planning we have to do for the pension fund. I think our total liability horizon goes out 80 years or something. And when we're looking at these sort of issues, we are looking a very long time ahead. Okay. if we can move to, see no more hands, we can move to the recommendations, which is to note the report and has agrees to bring forward the contribution rate review to Q4 2021. Are we happy to do that?
Great.
Okay, we're now going to have a 5 minutes-ish break, as we prescribed before. So, well, I'll make it 4.5, shall we? And so we reconvene at 7:45. And I expect we'll get through the agenda. Well, I won't make any promises, but rather items left. Right. I'm going to open the window. Is it? I'm going to try and open a window on those sides. Is that all right with people? Because I sense there's not much airflow here, really. You cold? Sorry? That might work, mightn't it? Yeah. Hello, I propose to start again, if that's all right.
I can't be bothered.
Okay, so we're almost all in our seats. If we're all right then, if we could move on to agenda item 7, the quarterly update report. Michael, I think first, isn't it?
Yep. So this is the usual quarterly update, which provides an update on basically the key quarterly performance measures, both on the funding position, which we've already discussed in the earlier paper, in overall investment performance, an update on responsible investment, and largely that's the engagement through LAF, and administration performance, and also reporting of breaches. Within the paper, there's also an update on some of the major projects that are going on. I'm not going to go through every part of this report, but I will highlight some of the main issues. So we've already discussed the funding update, so in the last paper, and the fact that as at the end of June 21, overall funding level for the Hackney pension fund is 107%. And that's compared to 92% when we did the valuation back in March 2019. So that's continued to improve, largely due to the strong investment performance of the last quarters, etc. In terms of investment updates or actual investment performance, there's an appendix which has got lots of detail in there, but the highlights from that report are that the funds produced positive absolute returns over the quarter of nearly 5%, which is broadly in line with the benchmark for the fund. All asset classes have actually produced positive returns over the quarter, but the largest contribution has certainly come from the growth assets, and particularly equities. Just to take that out beyond the quarter, over the last 12 months, the funds outperformed the benchmark overall by about 1%, producing overall returns of 17.5%. And over the last 3 years, the returns of 8.2% are in line with the benchmark. I think you can see from those chunky return figures that that's certainly the driver behind the funding level, etc. In terms of, obviously, we approved an investment strategy and made several changes, or approved several changes to the mandates that we're holding. So in June, we reported that we were awaiting due diligence on the the due diligence on the private debt renewable infrastructure funds have been completed, and that we would actually finish the actual documentation to subscribe to private debt and renewable infrastructure funds. Over the last quarter, we've actually been liaising with Hymans and the LSIV regarding the actual transitions into some of the funds that were approved. I'm pleased to say, actually today, we've actually now invested 247 million, so that is the 13% that was agreed, into the LSIV Paris-aligned Global Alpha Fund. Tomorrow we'll be investing into the Emerging Market Equity Fund with the LSIV. That's about circa 95 million. And next week we're doing the transitions across into the Diversified Growth Fund. Obviously, we've been working very closely with LSIV and Hymans to make sure those transitions are smooth, and that where we're redeeming the old funds, that we're not left out of market for longer than we need to be to reduce exposure to any risk there. In terms of responsible investment update, I think the committee itself, there's the paper there, appendix, which actually sets out LAF quarterly engagement. And certainly at the moment, in terms of engagement with companies and fund managers, that's the major source. As you know, we are discussing that as part of our responsible investment review in terms of what we'll do going forward. Pensions admin in section 10 of the report, there's a number of key performance indicators they're reported on. We've changed the format slightly, hoping it's better, because it doesn't just show cases that are coming and out, it now shows actually what's outstanding as well. So it gives a better, hopeful insight into what's going on there. In terms of the business as usual KPIs, I think Equinity are doing relatively well. Where we have got issues is on some of the one project in particular. So if we go down to section 10.5 of the report, and particularly annual benefit statements, unfortunately you can see it there in the section there that as at the 31st of August, which is the statutory deadline for getting out both the active and deferred statements so we've got a particular issue with the deferred statements. At that point, you've right in this report, none of the deferred statements have been issued. We've had various discussions with Equinity over this to try and get to the root of the issue. And basically, to be honest, it's quite a big communication issue within Equinity, within both their own teams and back to us as the client. So until a couple of weeks ago, we were being told that the project's going really well, everything's going to be out on time. And at one point, it was even told that deferred statements were due to go because the team that we actually liaise with, that was what they've been informed. It turns out that a decision has been made within Equinity to focus on the active statements and get those out, as many of those out on time, and to defer the deferred statements. Now, if that had been communicated more widely, both within Equinity and certainly with the council, obviously straight away we would have gone back and said, you can't do that, they need to be out by the 31st of August. So that was the major cause. We've had various discussions around with Equinity about what they're doing about it, what the cause was. I think some of the issue there has been certainly a misunderstanding of some of the regs around the deferred statements as to the people on that particular team. Apparently there was also a sickness issue with someone that was actually dealing with the deferred element. But overall, it's communications.
Sorry, what the second issue was?
The communications issue. Yeah. And for me, that's the major worry, that there's a lack of, or seems to be a lack of communication within Equinity, both within their own teams and back to us as clients. I've got an update on the numbers. So particularly on the deferreds, as of today, 6,400 of them are now in the post. So, and there's various reasons why nearly another 1,000 nearly. They're undergoing further address validation checks, but obviously this is an issue. We do need to report breach to the pensions regulator again, but we're working closely with Equinity to make sure fully understand what's happened and how we can make sure it doesn't happen again. I have asked Equinity to actually attend pension board the week after next. Because obviously this will be, whilst it's an important committee, I think it's going to be a particular focus for the board on their looking at the admin side of the funds activities. I think that's largely it, to be honest. The other projects are going well, particularly what I will be pleased to tell you is the project to do with getting data across from our payroll to the pension system is virtually over the line. They're testing final month's reports now, for September's, live data, etc. Most of the issues seem to be ironed out now. We're looking to go to business as usual on that within the next few weeks. As you members of the committee that have been on the committee for a while know that that's been an ongoing issue, data coming from particularly Hackney Council across to the pension fund. So I'm really pleased that that has actually is really progressing now and is across the line, hopefully. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So I've got Ben. Shall we take Ben first? So
Yep.
just to prove the online people are not being second-class citizens. Ben.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, really, it's the main issue you flagged, the equity thing. I mean, I think you used the word we've had to report a breach again. I mean, was the previous breach to the regulator to do with equity? Have we? It was it was or wasn't?
Yeah, so we reported a breach to the regulator. I think it wasn't last year. There was an improvement. We didn't need to report breach on this area. It was the
Previous 2
It
years.
was the previous 2 years. Yeah.
But to do with equity.
It was to do with the annual benefit statement.
Well, wasn't part of it to do with our problems with information?
It's the data. There's a mix of numbers. So
payroll data as well.
Yeah, it was related to the annual benefit statements and the failure of those to go out on time. So there's a number of reasons, not necessarily all equity. This year's I will fairly squarely put on equity because the lack of communication, etc. Previous years it was partly to do with data as well, which I've already said we're addressing. So
yeah, I mean, it obviously begs the question as to their suitability. Have we procured them at too low a price where they just can't meet what's required of them? I mean, what sort of review are you undertaking? When does their contract expire? And I mean, was it the lowest tender? Have we? I mean, there are more structural problems here that we need to address.
Karen, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, you can.
After Michael first, then.
So the tender was actually relatively recent. We're actually just finalising the implementation of a new contract with them, which has a greater degree of monitoring. And the new contract definitely has a higher number and level of service standards. So it's much easier for us to spot when there are issues now. Off the top of my head, I can't recall the pricing, but they weren't. I don't think there was really much in the pricing. It seemed a perfectly fair price. The difficulty we have is there's only actually 2 private sector organisations that do local government pension scheme administration. There are a couple of shared services that are run through local authorities. So actually the market for an administrator is really difficult. It's a small market. And we've already been asked the question tonight, why not bring it in-house? But the actual difficulty in doing that is just horrendous. It's such a complex set of benefits to administer. On the whole, Equinity are doing quite a good job, I would say, at the moment on the day-to-day side. They're putting in, under the new contract, there's a lot of advancements that they're putting in, a lot of improvements. Michael's already referred to the interface for the data, which will allow data to be uploaded on a monthly basis, which is phenomenal from the regulator's perspective. But they're also putting on online systems for employers and scheme members, and doing lots of further checks such as data improvement. They've got a new website, etc. And they've got a call centre with good monitoring as well for scheme members. So it is really awful what's happened here with the annual benefit statement. But I think hand on heart, you can see this was a really unfortunate mistake on their part, which should be a one-off issue. And they're taking it extremely seriously by the meeting that Michael and I had with them earlier on this week. We didn't ask for the big bosses to be pulled out, but the big bosses turned up at the meeting, so they are taking it very seriously. But on the whole, I think their service is probably as good as we can expect, and this is an unfortunate situation. Yeah.
Okay, I might come back on that later, but Margaret and then Nick. Margaret.
Thanks, Chair. Just going on to page 12 of the report in relation to the guaranteed minimum pensions. I noticed that there's, these are obviously notoriously difficult, but it looks like there is some backlog in calculating discrepancies. I just wondered whether you can give us any sort of ballpark figures about what the sort of amounts involved are in relation to the adjustment of benefits.
Is that Karen?
Yes, I'm happy to pick that up.
Sorry, I'm remiss here. Could you just say who you are for the best?
Oh, apologies.
We've got a couple of new members, including Nick and Margaret.
So I'm Karen McWilliam. I work for Aon, who are the fund's governance advisors and benefits, and therefore we provide advice on matters such as administration and also governance as well.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, that was remiss of me.
Oh, thank you. So the guaranteed minimum pension. So the one thing I will, if you don't mind me just pointing out, is this is not Equinity's fault. It also isn't the council's fault. The guaranteed minimum pension reconciliation and rectification exercise is because of some changes by the state in the way that they actually keep records. So all pension schemes were asked to do effectively a check of some elements that were held within the pension scheme with the equivalent that was held by DWP. And so that's what the reconciliation is, reconciling the two systems. And as part of that, it was noticed there was differences, and every scheme that did this noticed there was differences. And the outcome is that some pensioners will have had too little pension, and some will have had too much. Now, just to put this in context, we are still getting all the figures verified, but we understand the adjustments that are being made over September and October is there was 71 pensioners who are actually going to see an increase in their pension, and 414 will receive a decrease in their pension. And we can provide some further analysis next month. Previously we showed a chart with sort of the range of overpayments and underpayments, and also an age profile, so we can maybe do that for next committee if the committee wish. Just to clarify, for the 71 underpayment cases, as well as having their pension increased, they also get arrears of the underpayments back to when the underpayment first occurred, and those arrears will be increased with interest, and interest is paid quarterly compounded 1% above base rate. So for some of them, actually, it will be quite a nice payment they'll be receiving in arrears. The majority are quite small amounts. There is one person that's going to have an increase in their pension of over £2,000. In relation to the 414 overpayments, at a previous meeting, it was agreed that the overpayments would not be reclaimed. So that's the payments up to now would not be reclaimed. They'd just be written off effectively by the pension fund. And then the reduction in pension is what comes in from now. And the biggest reduction in pension, I understand, is about £2,600 per year. So it's a sizable amount, but again, we can provide some further analysis on that. Last year, at the next meeting, we could probably provide some feedback just in relation to any calls or complaints and how Equinity are dealing with that as well. Okay, but just to clarify, this is something that a lot of the pension schemes and pension funds are working through. So, sorry, another question?
Margaret?
Sorry, really in terms of communications with the pensioners affected, because obviously, well, certainly the a £2,000 cut is going to be a significant.
Yeah.
I mean, and what communications that you had with them so far? They had with them so far.
So, Councillor, oh sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, the communications, as we agreed at the committee, where we actually took you through. Sorry, you wasn't on the committee back then, but. We went through some analysis, as Karen has just said, about the figures at the time, and it was also agreed that the communications would be cleared through the chair, which we did do. Obviously, those actually seeing a reduction in their pension, etc., we've actually given them 2 months' notice of that reduction, and actually explained why it's happening, etc., etc. As I said, we need to see what the feedback from that is, because those letters have only just gone out, I think, in terms of that being reported to them. But it was obviously important that we gave them some more notice than people are actually seeing an increase. So that's what we've done there. Yeah, well, we're really awaiting feedback, and we did say that where we've got particular cases where we think it's, you know, particularly older people, you know, obviously there are going to be older people, and particularly old people, some of them, with potentially fortunately from the figures we saw before, there weren't many with big or, I mean, it's easy for us to say, you know, not very big reductions, but there weren't too many of those. But obviously, as we get the feedback, we'll actually deal with those on a one-to-one basis as well in terms of the impact on them. But we do need to take the reduction back, and we're legally obliged to do so in terms of reducing it ongoing.
Okay, thank you. Is that all right, Mike? We did have a major discussion on this, didn't we, before we implemented the policy some months ago? It's a useful question, because I haven't actually checked how it's going. Sorry, Margaret, are you happy with that response, or have you got any other?
Yes, thank you,
Nick, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, just an aside on that, as a new member, I clearly wasn't aware of this, but £2,500 is presumably quite a proportion of someone's income. And adjusting people's lives, if it comes out of the blue, even over 2 months, sounds very difficult. And I would like some reassurance that we're giving people real support, because people may well have made obligations and commitments that they simply can't meet if their income drops by, say, I don't know, 10, 15%. I think it's a really serious issue. And I do think it's not just about communications, it's about listening, it's about support and help, and having some flexibility where people have made financial commitments, that we will find ways to do with it. I mean, this is something just dropped out of the blue on a household, to do with administrative changes. It's not political in any sense. It's not the outcome of a discussion in Parliament that they might calculate. It's literally out of the blue. So I'm just going to appeal for this to be dealt with as supportively as possible. Yeah. Can I just, on the equanimity issue, I mean, to me, it is, their service is quite unacceptable. Now, I understand some of the points that have been made about the lack of alternatives, but both on the performance and the comms side, to me, this is a company that is not performing adequately. And I guess 2 points. One is, in the longer term, I think we should be exploring other ways of doing it. May not be feasible to bring it back literally into Hackney, but I would have thought, looking at other joint initiatives, other joint public sector initiatives, there might be some scope. And again, not something I can quite accept, given that we're at the beginning of a contract. But if we can find ourselves at the end of a gun at our heads, I just think that's not an acceptable place for a major service like this. So I would like to see 2 things. One is that we do explore longer term options within the public sector. And by the way, we've got exactly the same problem among the private sector audit companies, who are now providing a totally unacceptable service to the service. And I think we ought to be doing a similar thing in that area as well. But so it's not unique to this company, it's not unique to this sector, but it's raised a very serious long-term issue about the ability of private sector to provide adequate service. So that's one thing. I think long-term exploration of options, and including encouraging maybe other development of other ways of doing it. The other thing is, and I take Michael's point that things are getting better, there is hopefully some chance to improve, can we see a quick update on this? In other words, can we see members kept informed about the improvements that they have promised, so that we at least know that they are getting back on track? That would be helpful. And certainly as Chair of Audit Committee, I would like to know that is happening. So that was equanimity. Then just on, and a similar point about our pensions stuff, I'm absolutely delighted. I came into audit 4 or 5 years ago. This has been on the red risk register for finance for all of that period. The idea that it's finally going off is very welcome news, and I understand that could happen this month, but I would like to have an update at the October Audit Committee to see how that first run has gone. I think that's quite a good thing. Final point, Chair, on
are these all connected, or should we deal with?
No, if you want to.
Shall we deal with those points first so far? I mean, the first one was about support to people who are affected by the changes in pension level, isn't it?
Well,
Can we what's happened so far? I mean, under the arrangements we've got, I should have been notified if there were any problems. So,
well, certainly to date, we've had no feedback, but it is early days. The letters only went out. I can't remember exactly.
It was just over the past week,
yeah,
really.
so they haven't just gone out. But we did say in the original report about the GMP that we would certainly provide what support we could, as where we get some of those cases.
well, that's not just, as Nick and Margaret were saying, it's not just about, this is what the changes and explaining to them, is it? It's if someone's in financial difficulty, we need to offer some sort of assistance or advice. I mean, if you've got a cut of 2,700, I mean, if your pension's 50,000, you can budget around that. If it's 3,000, as many of our pensioners are,
no, indeed,
it's a lot of money, isn't it?
And some of the analysis that we can provide will show how extreme and what potential impact it would have. But as I said, but we do need to take the reduction, or else we're acting illegally in terms of.
But over what time? If we can forgive the past, which we are doing, so we are putting a subsidy into this.
Yes, no.
Then there must be
around 2.5 million from memory.
Yeah, and that was part of the reason why we did that.
No, I understand that. But my point is, the principle is that we can do. There is some financial flexibility in that. We're not just totally rule bound here. If we're breaking the rule here, which should involve reclaiming, and rightly not, can we now adopt a similar, targeted approach to when, as the chair has said, when need is identified?
Okay, should we do Karen?
Sorry, just to clarify, we are not reclaiming. The reduction is going forward. Legally, we have to do that, and they're actually, because the reduction is going forward, there's no way that you can spread that. If you spread that, then you're making it worse. You're effectively creating further overpayments. The one, I'm not sure that's particularly helpful, but the Pensions Ombudsman has provided really good guidance on how to deal with such cases. It's very strict about the fact you have to reduce. However, it does clarify the case law situations where there could be some flexibility, and it tends to be around cases where a person can prove that they have changed their lifestyle to rely on that amount of money. So really, we don't have too much flexibility. We've got, but it's not a complete wall. If people are complaining, we will be engaging with them, trying to understand their circumstances and trying to see whether any of the case law that would allow that flexibility could apply in those cases.
Okay, sorry, the next question was about equity, wasn't it?
Yeah, so
what are we going to do? Is the first point, and then is there a better way of doing it? And can we look at the options?
Okay, as we've already said, we are implementing the new contract where it is much stricter monitoring. They've got, I would say, tougher performance indicators and key performance indicators to actually report against. We're monitoring those quite rigorously, definitely, to make sure the service improves. I would say the day-to-day business as usual service is pretty good. It's some of these one-off annual, sorry, not the one-off, some of the annual events that we have issues with. And that's partly because of the way, from looking from the outside, partly for the way Equinity are actually set up. And as I've already said, the communications within there. So that's something we need to address with them, I think. In terms of looking at the future, certainly when we did the last tender, we did look at other options. We did look at some joint operations, etc. But it just didn't suit the fund and the way we operate, because we have got a small in-house team as well, and it just didn't suit the way we operate against what was on offer from Equinity. But obviously, we will always look at options and improvements going forward, certainly.
How long is the contract to run at the moment? Or we would reconsider?
4 years.
I think it's got 4 years before
we just go back into, I can sort of remember.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's disappointing so far, isn't it? There's no way around it.
If I may add that immediately they identified what the issues were at their end, and they're already talking about how they're going to make sure they don't happen again. So they have admitted that the team that are doing this, one person went sick, but they have admitted actually the team's too lean and they've got a business case in for some more people already. And also they're going to get an external organisation in to completely review the way that they do the process. So immediately they're telling us about things that they've already identified to make sure that this, and we've been quite focused at this point in time, we're more focused on tell us how you're fixing the problem, and then we'll come back to the lessons learned, you know, because we want to make sure that the individuals that are affected get their statements within the next couple of weeks. So but we have said to them that we would have a further discussion about this.
Okay, well, so we've got 4 years. We've got plenty of time to look at, you know, new and innovative ways of operating this. And while 4 years on one level is a long time, and pensions life, it's not, is it? So if we could, yeah, I think the sense I'm getting from the committee is, I mean, I'm not saying, you know, obviously we're with Quincy and we want them to improve, but we should use the time we've got available to look again at possibilities of insourcing and or more innovative ways of providing the service. I think that's okay. Nick, you want to make more points? Did you? Another?
Yeah, no, I just got one final point on the lap fee issue. I mean, I found the lap fee report very helpful indeed.
Thank you very much.
Because
I don't think being the vice chair of lap fee is quite.
I was going to say the power in the land, but I'm genuinely. I thought the approach that they were taking, which was to try and maximise leverage and get some concrete results. But I guess they seem to be doing more effectively in the climate area, not least because the company seem more open to compromise. But I mean, I guess 2 points that there must be a limit when a company doesn't listen anymore. And doesn't engage, then that's the point at which we ought to, and I guess that Latvia would recommend taking more a possible divest decision. But it's having that, you know, and not just being put off by the kind of greenwashing. And I was particularly interested in the Shell one, because clearly they were absolutely alert to the fact that Shell were playing that game and really pushed it. Although it took the court to actually make the difference. I thought that was encouraging. So I guess a message that we ought to ensure that Latvia really does keep them on a short leash, you know, give them a chance to respond, engage, but there must be a limit. The other point where they're less impressive, and as chair of Latvia, maybe you can give us a sense of where things are going, was on the whole human rights issue, which is very complicated, difficult. But clearly we need to move to the same approach that they're talking there about really understanding, setting criteria and engaging. And I guess it's just an update on what Latvia are doing in that area, not least to try and help us in our decisions on the basis of the 2 submissions that have been made. And that's where Latvia, it seems to me, can provide a really helpful framework for us. Okay.
Well, I agree with all that, and I won't use the time now to talk to you about Latvia, but I'm very happy if we have a chat about, you know, what you think Latvia's priorities are. Latvia's a member organisation. It's very thin. You know, it only costs us 10,000 a year, I think. So it's not. It does limit what it can do overall, but its work programme is influenced and decided by its members. So if we can arrange to have a discussion, and I'll certainly feed that back into the work programme and process. That's right. But yeah, thank you for the compliment. I think it's a very valuable organisation. I was going to make the point actually that as we move forward, looking at our own RI policy, and maybe it's a question for Andrew or someone, is you know, we're going to need to do more of this sort of stuff ourselves, or arrange for it to be done ourselves, or have a more direct relationship with our fund managers and maybe the companies they own. I think that's generally accepted, and I'm guessing that's a major part of what we're going to pick up in future discussions on the RI policy. Do you want to comment, Michael? I see you nodding.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's what we said was is part of the refresh of the RI policy, is looking at how we engage with both fund managers, the CIV, because obviously the fund managers are actually employed by the CIV now, or most of them are, but it is how we engage with those and how we actually have an impact with those fund managers and other organisations really. So that is definitely part of the work we're doing around improving our own engagement with these people, so, you know, more forcibly, more directly.
Great. Jonathan, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on point 77 in your RI paper, Michael. You were talking about the fact that
on the you've moved. Sorry, what paper?
Yeah, this is agenda item 9. So I'm moving ahead.
You are. Go on.
We're still on.
As long as it's relevant to this point, ask your question. Yeah, go on.
Very relevant. The costs of this additional person, are they going to be borne by the fund and only the fund, or what?
So which one are you looking at?
77.
Okay, yeah, yes, sorry. It will be borne by the fund, yes, because it's
only by the fund.
Yes, because it's responsible investment policy of the committee and the fund, so it's right that.
Who will also accrue the financial benefits of the work? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get to that when we get to that paper again. Okay, then. So I think we covered all the points I was going to raise, except to draw the committee's attention to obviously into the funding update, which 100% funded, given the qualifications that we understand that we need to put to that figure, is still a very impressive position to be in. So I just thank all our advisors and our officers and ourselves a bit for being able to achieve that. And secondly, the strategy implementation update, which we skipped over, but just to point out there's an awful lot of work in there. And again, I want to thanks our advisors and our officers particularly for pushing all that forward, because there's an awful lot of work in there and a lot of progress has been made. So thank you for that. Okay, is there any other questions or comments on this paper? Otherwise, can we note it?
Okay.
I'll take that as a yes. Okay then. So that brings us on to agenda item 8. Shall I scan through? I'll have it just drop my oh, well done there. This is the yes, of course, it's the funding strategy statement.
Yeah,
flexibilities. Oh yeah. Yeah, a bit technical this one, but I got it. Yeah.
It is, but it was a follow-up from the.
On second reading, I understood it.
We had a paper at the last committee which looked at discretionary flexibilities within the funding strategy, and we did say we'd bring this further appendix to the funding strategy statement back to this committee. This basically deals with a couple of issues that the regulations have updated and allow some discretions, and it sets out the fund's proposed position on looking on individual employers asking for a review of their contributions between valuation periods and how that would be allowed and circumstances for it, and also deferred debt agreements, which is where an employer might be exiting the fund for a number of reasons, mainly because they would have no employees left in it or their contracts come to an end. How we would deal potentially with a request to defer any exit deficits that employer has. So this is really setting out a framework for the fund to be able to apply equally across the organisations if they're in those positions.
Thank you. There's an appendix from Hyman's which I won't ask them to present if that's okay. Yeah, though other questions on this. Obviously, there's an important paper actually, and this is and there's some key changes to our discretions in there which we need to consult with. Are there any questions or comments on it?
Well, I'd just be interested to understand what the implications of this in financial terms. I mean, I understand the measures that are proposed, to give more flexibility.
Well, okay. Do you want to deal with that, Mike? I mean, the key thing is about the obviously employer's contribution, isn't it?
Yeah. So contribution reviews, it would only be. I mean, this does set out the criteria, and it's obviously for some. It would only arise certainly wouldn't, it'd be very unlikely to rise for Hackney Council because there's one of these criteria unlikely to be met by the council's position. But in terms of a scheme, one of the smaller employers that might be coming to the end of their contract and coming out, if they're in a surplus, they could ask for a review of the contributions and actually within the term of the contract that's left, actually recoup that surplus if they're entitled to it. And it would obviously, it's again on a case-by-case basis, but it shouldn't impact the fund, well, it wouldn't impact the fund adversely. The same as a deferred debt agreement, it's just allowing for particularly the smaller employers where they could at the moment be leaving the fund potentially with a quite big deficit. If that is the case, obviously if they had to pay that on the day they left the fund, it could put that company under, could make them bankrupt, and that's something they don't want to be particularly responsible for. The fund would not then get its money back anyway. So I think in the longer term that this is just helping those situations. So I don't expect it to have an adverse impact on the fund's finance at all.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the principle. It's more in our experience, what sort of flexibility actually, say, a small contractor.
Well, we've never been, these are new regulations that allowed us to have these flexibilities.
But presumably they were drawn up on the basis that some experience in this area.
But they're drawn up based on what's allowed in the regulation.
Yeah.
And how the fund wants to. Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt, sorry.
Sorry, and how the fund, sorry, and how officers and our advisors feel that we should be implementing those regs.
Can I just, so, I mean, like, we've agreed earlier to bring forward the review of the employer's provision. Does this potentially give us authority to implement it earlier than we might have done otherwise?
Our contribution?
Yes. Does it give because my understanding last time I asked, which wasn't very long ago, was that you could not change employer contributions between valuations.
There are any certain circumstances.
Does that, I mean, given that we're now going to look at ours early, does that change that position?
It doesn't change that position.
So it doesn't really change that much, really.
More certainty earlier about what the future contribution
will be.
Yeah. So it doesn't change the fact we won't be able to.
No, that's sort of what I understood. I want to make that clear. Okay, Nick, is that okay?
Yeah, I was just looking for a kind of rough idea of the quantum.
I don't think there is one.
We don't know.
Yeah, I don't expect this to be used that often by employers.
No, I understand that.
We don't have many employees leaving, on a regular basis, obviously.
I think that's a very good question, though, because sometimes I find that the things that look big mean nothing at all, and sometimes the very small changes have huge financial implications, don't they?
Yeah.
Otherwise, okay, then can we then note the report? Sorry, have I got that right?
Let's approve the changes there, the additions to the financial.
Ask to consider and approve the further change. So what we actually approving?
So that appendix, the part appendix B is the addition to the funding strategy, which is setting out our approach to contribution review and the deferred debt agreement.
Okay, we'll read that. And to agree, officers should consult employees about the order. Yeah. So can we agree those then? 2 points. Agreed. Okay, thank you very much. Item number 9, then, responsible investment update. So are you going to start this, Michael?
Yep. So item number 9 is really just bringing something a little bit. So obviously we had the workshop last week to kick off the work around, or to progress the work around responsible investment policy and strategies and climate change. What I've tried to do in this paper is just summarise what the committee looked at the workshop. The main messages that came out of that workshop, which are set out largely in paragraph 6.8. So there was the importance around continuing to engage, etc., before using divestment as a measure. We talked about a just transition from fossil fuels and considering what impact and where the fund can actually have an impact on those communities that might be affected by that transition. The fact that human rights considerations, we need to ensure they're broad, so they're not focused on individual, one individual country. Just a couple of things around measurements there. The fact that how the fund's measured and how it look against our true cost, and just really reinforcing the fact that as time goes on, obviously the quality of data available is improving and becoming better, and that does help us in terms of looking at the type of metrics that we will use for reporting in future. And in section 7, I've just tried to set out a timetable basically for where we're going in terms of future work on this. So obviously the ultimate aim of that workshop was to start, and the ongoing work was to ensure that the fund develops a clear written policy statement in respect of responsible investment. And that will include, by March, an approval of an overall RI policy along with a refreshed climate change policy and target.
Sorry, I'm looking for
section 7.
Sorry, it was missing in the paper packs, this paper as well.
The final paragraph here is 6.8.
Okay, I don't know what happened there.
Sorry, I just noticed it missing.
Has someone got a paper that...
I didn't know that because I'm reading off of my paper I sent across. I don't know what's happened there.
It was a correct one sent round today, guys.
Yeah, the one online I printed out myself has got it all in. I think the paper one that's handed round was missing a page.
Well, in that light, I don't have a machine in front of me. Can we know what was in the item?
We'll take mine.
Yeah.
So I'm just going through what's in there in some detail.
Thank you.
It's the next steps anyway. So.
Cheers.
I also set out that we had a submission from Divest around why they think divestment is more powerful than engagement, and we said I think the fund needs to respond to that, as we did take it as a submission to the workshop. So it was about the fund actually doing that. I said at the workshop that we'd be re-engaging True Cost to actually do the actual measurement against our target, and that's due to come up pretty soon. So I'll be talking to True Cost over the next couple of weeks with an aim to bring their update on the target to hopefully January committee. And that will show the overall outcome against the target that we set back nearly 6 years ago now, and obviously help inform where we go in the future. I think the November committee will also consider further the reporting regime. So I think last committee we had quite a detailed session on stewardship code and TFCD. I think we actually need to bring some formal recommendations to the committee about adopting those, particularly stewardship code, which is more voluntary, whereas TFCD is going to become compulsory for LGPS in any case. It sets out that both I think the work to actually approve an overarching responsible investment policy for the fund will take place over 2 committees, so November and January, I think. There's quite a bit of work to go into that. And that the actual new climate change target, when approved, will go to March committee. We set out previously in some of the work where we had a timetable, we'd then look at, because obviously once we've actually adopted an RI policy, we need to see what our mandates are in terms of benchmarks we use. So we do a review of those and make sure they are aligned to the fund's beliefs, targets and policies that we set. So that might require some further changes to the investment strategy. And then finally, I've in the report, I said that it's recognised certainly by officers, and I think the chair recognises, we've had discussions about the need for an increased resource on the in-house team, particularly because the work that's going to come out of things like signing up to stewardship code and the continued focus, obviously, on responsible investment, reporting targets, etc. So we'll be looking to draw up a new job description and actually employ someone to take that work through. That's that paper and recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Michael. 2 points on the next steps timetable bit. 72.72. Can I make a request that the responses to both, well, in fact, Divest, PSC and Friends of Israel are copied to members of the committee, please?
Oh, we would certainly do that.
Wonderful. And lastly, with regard to 7.7, I'm not going to bang on, but are you able to give me some idea of the cost quantum that we're going to be asking the fund to bear with regard to this new RI appointment, please?
I can't put a figure on it yet because I haven't even looked at the job description. I'm currently starting to draw up the JD, which will have to then go through the normal process, the council's process of the grade being applied to it, etc. What I am probably looking in terms of structure is that post will report to the equivalent of what I'm doing now. So it'll be probably at group accountant level, I would have thought. I can't say that for sure.
So this sounds pretty senior, so quite pricey. That's my point.
I don't think it's pricey in terms of the size of the fund.
No, that's a well-made point. But it's an additional burden, isn't it, on the fund? I'm not being negative about it.
I wouldn't say it's an additional burden. I think we've got a lot of burdens on the staff that are trying to run the fund at the moment. And as you know, I was director overseeing it before, and I didn't recognise the pressures that the team are under in that role.
Okay, Karen wants to come back on that point. I've then got Ben and then Andrew. Is that the right way around? Karen I saw first anyway, so I'll take. Andrew, you want to come in right now by the looks of it? You're waving.
No, sorry, mine was just a comment in relation to Jonathan's question, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, go on then, and then Karen.
And maybe I'm not going to get involved in the finances consideration, but I would just flag that from a regulatory perspective, there is an incremental burden on all pension schemes in this area, and therefore, I guess there's always different ways to approach that, but there's going to be a cost, whether it's internally or externally staffed and resourced. Was just hopefully just a context point to just comment.
That's helpful. Karen?
Okay, so my point, Chair, was going to be quite similar, that the value that the team will get from having an RI expert, given the focus on the RI policy, will far outweigh the cost of this individual. And there's a lot of changes coming up that are being forced on funds, such as TCFD, and the risk of trying to absorb that within the current team could therefore impact other elements which could actually have a financial burden, including loss of investments if they're not able to respond quickly. So,
Ben, is it on this point?
I'm fully supportive of the member of staff, but I had other points.
Okay, go Nick then. I'll come back to you, Ben.
Yes, I mean, that's what I wanted to say. I think we should absolutely support this. I think the workshop proved how complicated this is. Our discussions today show that it's moving into new areas which will need to be managed. I think that it will provide an immense system cost change by managing the whole thing much better. And I would suggest we do have someone reasonably senior who can carry real insight, experience and authority when they give us guidance on this. So I absolutely endorse this. I guess my only other point was I'm a bit concerned about the absolute, when it comes to 6.8, this business. I obviously take the strategy that, as I said earlier, that engagement is the necessary first step, and that investment is an end point. But I guess as a last resort always implies for me that you do it enormously reluctantly. If as we said earlier, if Latvia is advising us that a company is simply not engaging or is refusing to do so, then it's not a last resort, it's an essential step. So I just think that it's a wording issue. I'm not disagreeing with the strategy, but I would like to see it clearly recognising that sense that there is a journey here, assessing, engagement, and then a decision.
Ben?
Yeah, fully agree with Nick's point there that the wording sort of implies it will be a very reluctant use, whereas I suppose I would like to see more of a consequence, unless you show you can improvement over a medium-term timeline. We will be disinvesting. So I think there does need to be a tweak to reflect possibly the view of the overall committee on that, would be my preference. The other couple of points would be, one, benchmarking, ambitious benchmarking, not not picking the easiest thing to benchmark against. I'm not saying that's what we're doing at the moment, but I would like ambitious benchmarking to test ourselves against. And also, I suppose, just on the engagement versus disinvestment debate, fully understand why that is a preferable approach in terms of carbon reduction, but for direct investment in fossil fuels, shouldn't we just be disinvesting? I mean, I'm not quite sure how, for those that sort of, though, like a coal company or whatever, where we may still have some small holding, I'm not quite sure how that features.
Yeah, great.
I'll take Henry, and then the officers and advisors come back. Yeah, is that the best way, Henry?
I'm not Henry.
Oh, God, it's... Do apologise.
Good. Apology accepted. So specifically on the issue of engagement, we raised it in the responsible investment workshop the other day about the point at which you have to say, look, mate, if you're not doing what we need, then we need to go. But on Ben's point about should we automatically be divesting from fossil fuels, we should be moving away from bad investments, which is what fossil fuels effectively are. I think since we had that workshop, China has basically announced that they're not investing in any or developing any coal-fired power stations beyond its own borders, which is very significant and basically is killing coal ahead of COP26. But we also need to recognise that fossil fuel companies themselves need to transition communities out of dependent work and industries dependent on fossil fuels, and a rapid divestment in that way does not deliver a just transition and therefore will not meet our other ESG and responsible investment criteria. I'm very, very clear that we do not want to have more coalfield communities in other parts of the world experiencing what ours did in Britain, or other communities in Britain experiencing what our coalfield communities did. That is not the way for us to achieve what we want to do on net zero. And it's an extremely important part of our responsible investment plan to understand how we are investing to support the transition away for those communities.
Okay, thank you very much, Polly. Do we want to, who wants to come back on that then first?
Sorry.
Oh, so Ben, did you want to say something? Oh,
was that Andrew?
Andrew, I think.
I'm happy
Andrew,
to.
sorry.
I think to a large degree within the discussion that we had at the RI committee, I think I would echo what's just been said in response to Ben's question, actually, because I think that's spot on. I think we got to think about the journey first. At the moment, the way the investment strategy is set up is you've got a low carbon investment, we've got a global Paris aligned investment now, you've got a balance of different exposures. So I think that where we go next is very much thinking about it thoughtfully and considering, understanding what we have now got, understanding the real meaning of that, and perhaps not just making any knee-jerk reactions in relation to the investment strategy, but working to make that better and optimize the way that it's structured progressively through a very thoughtful way, as Polly has suggested.
yes. Okay, any other officers want to come back on any of that? Michael, do you have any particular comments?
No, I think Andrew's just covered most of it, and I certainly pick up the point that Councillor Billington made, and I made reference to that in the main takes from the committee. We do need to ensure we've got a just transition and look at where it can impact other communities, etc.
Okay, Right, yeah, I think the thing on sorry, I can't see it now. I couldn't. The thing on I've never seen. If you look at our carbon policy, we are not divesting in the sense we're not picking on companies and selling them, but we are over time. We have an allocation asset allocation strategy over time. Not only actually reduces our exposure to fossil fuels, which means we have lost some companies. Like we don't. I believe the current position is we don't own any pure play coal companies anymore. We might have done 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And we're also so in a sense we are losing our exposure to these assets. Although it depends what you mean by divest, doesn't it? Really. What we haven't traditionally done is gone around and pick some companies and say, you know, we're selling that, you know, outside an overarching strategy, if you know what I mean. So I think it's not quite as pure as we put it here, as you say, but I think the sentiment about, you know, not the fact we invest in funds means we can't deal in individual companies anyway. You know, it is quite a nuanced position, but so I accept all that.
Yeah,
okay.
I think the thing around dealing with companies within different mandates we've got is about improving the engagement with the fund managers, etc. as well, and taking that forward through them. Okay,
and I think sort of that's probably set out as a way to approach it all. Just checking on the timetable, I know with the March committee, I'm just wondering whether that actually happened, because at the moment it's set in the short campaign period. I know in the past we've had to decide not to hold them. So it might be possible to think about that. I don't know whether I'm proposing bringing it forward or not, but just have a look at the dates.
Yeah, we need to look at the dates because there are other things that we need to get.
And are we proposing any other additional meetings that are not yet in the calendar, in which case?
We've got the notes, so we're proposing an additional meeting in November. I think Rabia's canvass members.
Yeah.
From my sense of what I've seen, it's looking like it's 23rd.
23rd or 30th.
Yep. So 23rd of November is definitely one, and we need to do another workshop around developing the work on the responsible investment and that side of things as well. So I'll be looking for a date for that. Probably December, early December, not up against Christmas, obviously. But yeah.
Okay. Or whatever. Okay. So in terms of some of these issues, we still need to work through. I feel, you know, like we haven't really taken this discussion head on, and well, we are a bit today, but you know, in a way, perhaps that we just need to once and for all, in a way.
Yeah, I think we need to unpick further some of those issues that came out of the last workshop, definitely.
Yeah. And what I was also going to suggest, in the report, you have a list of the issues that in 6.8 that came out of the workshop. And I was going to say, if any, you know, that will prove quite important, I think, going forward as we do various sort of strategy stuff, reviews and things. So I would suggest that if you've got any comments about them or the wording of them, you email Michael and copy everybody else, and we can just check that. All right? So that'd be helpful. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments on it? Can we note the report? Okay. Thanks very much. Okay. So I think that's. I'm not being notified of any other business. So thank you all very much for your attendance tonight. Thank you.